I need someone to show me my place in all this.
Nothing will stand in our way.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
I will finish what you started.
Who are you?
I'm no one. There are stories about what happened.
It's true. All of it.
The Force. It's calling to you.
May the Force be with us.
My nerd world.
Just let it in.
Ojaba. Why does she get a blaster and I don't? Ojaba.
All right, so this episode is going to be heavy on the Last Jedi novelization details. Now, it's in no way, shape, or form complete. I have not personally read the novel yet. I've only seen excerpts, and basically what I've pulled is somebody who has their hands on the novel by Jason Fry put together a 4-part series of tidbits. And they threw it up on Reddit. So I grabbed all those tidbits. I pulled out the ones that I wanted to discuss with you, talk about with you this week. Plus, I have an excerpt from the novel that I'll share with you here in a few moments on the show this week. But if you want to go into the novel spoiler-free, I would suggest that you skip this episode this week so that you're not spoiled if you don't care, or maybe you're going to save it and put it off to the side for a later date, then you can go ahead and do that. But we're going to talk a lot of Last Jedi novel tidbits this week, along with, there's probably going to be an extra long show this week, your listener feedback, because I keep promising to do that, and I haven't done it. But you know what? My name is Jon Justice, and of course, I'm glad you're with me again this week. I really do appreciate it. As always, you can email me, talkshownerd@gmail.com. Leave a comment up on YouTube. I will be pulling comments from both YouTube and email this week when we get into the listener portion of the show. But boy, based off of what I've read from the tidbits of the novel, I can't wait to get my hands on it personally. And I don't feel like I'm being spoiled. It doesn't bother me at all, because a lot of this stuff is it's somebody else's comments about what they read, apart from this one other page later in a moment. So I'm fully expecting to go in with, semi-fresh eyes reading the words off the page. But, boy, for Reylo fans like you, if you're listening, and me, what a treat. We'll get into it, but it's clear, and let me say this, and I'll say this up front, because I do have something of a more serious note to talk about when it in regards to the franchise in and of itself as we get into the show this week. But let me start off by saying this: Reylo, Rey, Ben, Kylo, Reylo. Look, it's the core of the Last Jedi. There's no question about that, right? I do believe, as I've said several times, that a majority of people's problems with the film stems from that. I think that it's manifested in other thoughts and problems that people had with the film, but I think at the root was the core of this film that drove people nuts. It, for me, is one of the reasons why I treasure this movie. I cannot wait to get my hands on this Blu-ray. I'm looking more forward to getting my hands on the Blu-ray for all the nuggets that we talked about on last week's show. But to be able to watch it pristine on the TV, I can't wait. And I noticed something rather interesting. And this is just more from an audio video file movie buff standpoint, but there's a part of me that actually is starting to enjoy visually watching these films on my home TV than I am in the theater. Seeing some of the clips that they've shown and going back and watching some of the trailers, it's funny because several times seeing The Last Jedi in theaters, I noticed the screen wasn't quite pristine, and especially on certain scenes where it was full white in the background, like say on Crate, with the sky, you could see where there was actual like big rubs across the screen. And I've got a really nice Sony, just standard, high definition 1080p 60-inch TV that I parked myself rather close to, and I got a 5.1 surround sound system. And I mean, watching The Force Awakens on that TV is just spectacular. But I remember when The Force Awakens came out and I got the Blu-ray, thinking that from a visual standpoint, I was actually enjoying it more on my TV. And I think the same is going to ring true for The Last Jedi. It's almost as if there's a grittiness that I don't particularly care for seeing it on the big screen. And it may be more of a byproduct of the one theater that I saw The Last Jedi. The last few viewings was a theater that was closer to my house that wasn't one of these larger chains. So maybe the equipment wasn't as good. But man, I can't wait visually to see this Blu-ray, because the way this film is shot, it's so different than J.J. Abrams' Force Awakens. J.J. Abrams' Force Awakens is very vibrant, where there is a definite tone, and there is for all of Rian Johnson's films, if you notice. There's a definite tone to The Last Jedi that is very, it's very subtle. I don't want to say there's a brownness to it, but it's not quite as vibrant as JJ, but to me, it lends itself to just an amazing palette, and I can't wait for these next 2 weeks to blow by to get my hands on that Blu-ray. All right, so let's get back to what I was going to say, and that is, okay, Reylo is the core of The Last Jedi, there's no question. Based off of the tidbits that I've read, Reylo is the core of the novel, even more so. There seems to be a consensus among those that have read the novel and what we've read from these tidbits that it's clear that, Jason Fry wanted to expand upon what Rian Johnson was doing with Ben Solo, Kylo Ren, and Rey. Reylo is the core of Rian Johnson, there's no question. And we knew that from the beginning, but just to expand upon that for a moment, yeah, I mean, it's clear that when he went to go and put these characters through their challenges and through their paces, he zeroed in on these two core characters and decided to do something with them. And let me not get ahead of myself, because I actually wrote this down, and then I can break it down a little bit more. Rian Johnson took everything as far as he could for the viewer in The Last Jedi as it relates to Reylo. Jason Fry, too, appears to have taken everything as far as he could for the reader in the novelization of The Last Jedi. Both of those things they took it as far as they could in the movie. They took Reylo as far as they could in the book, while still leaving breathing room for J.J. Abrams to do what he chooses to do with Kylo Ren and with Rey. Okay? That's the point that I want to get across. Daisy Ridley came out recently in an interview and talked about how there was an outline for the films, for all three movies, a basic overview. And that my understanding of what she said was that Rian Johnson kind of tossed out any ideas and wrote something fresh and new for The Last Jedi. We know that it was being written during the Force Awakens, before the movie was done. But it seems pretty clear that where he ended the movie is where they had outlined. So Rian Johnson told the story and filled in the details and put all these people on a journey. But where they ended up with Kylo Ren being the leader now of the First Order, Rey being the leader of the Resistance, essentially being tasked now with perhaps starting and training new Jedi, the Resistance being decimated, needing to regroup, is where the outline had lent itself, while still leaving it open for whoever at the time were to go and choose where the path would go for Episode 9, and we now know it's going to be J.J. Abrams. There was a speculation and rumor on Reddit. Somebody came out and said that they found out the whole reason why Colin Trevorrow was fired from doing episode 9 is because he was upset with what they did with Luke and what they did with Snoke. It read like fanboy nonsense of somebody trying to perpetuate this idea that those were horrible, awful ideas for the franchise and that we would have gotten a better episode 9 if they had just listened to Colin Trevorrow and not killed Snoke and not killed Luke. Spoiler alert. I don't buy it for a second. But I just wanted to throw that out there as a bit of news. All right, let me get back to what I was talking about. We don't have a choice, right, as viewers. We don't have a choice of where this story is going to go with J.J. Abrams. They're going to do whatever it is they want to do. It does raise the question, though, of what would have been better. Whether it would have been better to have Ryan Johnson tell the whole rest of the story, right? To have one person tell it, or to allow others to kind of do what they're doing. And look, I think that's all going to be up to the viewer. I think that's all going to be up to, the individual fan of what they like and what they don't like. There's a lot of great arguments to go either way. I am excited that we're going to get Ryan Johnson's trilogy, which he will map out completely. We know that he'll direct the first of this new trilogy, and then perhaps other directors will come in and do the rest of it. But that trilogy does seem to be the closest thing in the new iteration Disney, Lucasfilm, Star Wars that will get to what George Lucas was doing, right? Where George had complete control to lay out the story, even though it changed along the way during the original trilogy and certainly doing the prequel trilogy, okay? And again, Daisy Ridley has said there is an outline, and I am now as convinced as ever, by the way, that Kylo Ren Ben Solo is the inverse of Anakin / Vader from the prequel trilogy, right? I'm more convinced now than ever with it being reversed. So when Anakin in the prequel trilogy starts off as a kid, ends up in the suit, you have just the baseline version. You have Kylo Ren starting off with the suit and then ending up redeemed at the end. I'm convinced this is where we are going now. With the original trilogy kind of being the odd trilogy out. And I don't mean that in a negative way at all. But it does make sense when you look at these 9 movies and the arc that takes place that that the sequel trilogy would be the reverse of the prequel trilogy. They would both be bookending the middle trilogy, which is at the root and the core of the whole story, right? The sequels were never going to be the original trilogy, as the prequels were never going to be the original trilogy. It makes sense to have the sequel trilogy mirror / reverse the prequel trilogy. And because of that, I am, again, convinced that this is where we're going with Ben Solo. And we're back full circle now, though, right? We're back full circle because that still doesn't answer the question, and we won't know until episode 9 comes out, of where does Ben Solo / Kylo Ren land at the end of episode 9, and how does Rey go and fit into that. J.J. Abrams has obviously options before him. Do we redeem Kylo Ren all the way? Do we redeem him, but he ends up getting taken out at the end? I mean, look, there's a lot of different possibilities, and that's what's got me so excited about this final trilogy. And honestly, excited that J.J. Abrams is the one to do it. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. I love all of his movies. I think he's going to be freed up with episode 9 to not be rooted in having to revive doing that thing with my fingers, for lack of a better word. The franchise, right? He can open it up. He did say he wants to tie all the movies together. So, again, keeping in mind that Kylo Ben, right, is going to be the inverse of Anakin. I do believe he's going to be redeemed in some way. How that happens, there's a lot of different paths that they can take, and we will have to, just wait and see how that whole thing plays out.
This is not going to go the way you think.
All right, so quick comment, and then we'll get into these tidbits from the Last Jedi novelization. I heard Christian Harloff, who I respect a lot and really like listening and watching Jedi Council. I watch Movie Talk daily on Collider, but on this week's Jedi Council, he was making comments about kind of what I was just referring to, and that is the direction of the films, who's guiding the films. Is it a hodgepodge of directors' ideas? Do they have a cohesive idea? He, not being all that impressed with the way that Kathleen Kennedy was handling the series. And he went so far as to say that he believes that Dave Filoni, who did Rebels, which, by the way, time permitting, we'll talk Rebels. But, oh, my gosh, the second to last week of shows, and the finale is tomorrow night, was just spectacular. If you haven't, it was some of the best Star Wars I've ever seen, by the way. The World to Another World or whatever. I forgot what it was called, but I've watched it twice already, and it was just absolutely incredible. Such amazing Star Wars. And I can't wait to personally see what Dave Filoni ends up doing, whether it's another offshoot series, cartoon, a live-action show, or a movie. But Christian was going off about, how Dave Filoni is the heir apparent. He should be in charge of it, and doing a lot of criticizing of how Disney was handling this stuff. And I could be getting a lot of this stuff out of context and not remembering it correctly. I wrote some notes down and about this because I wanted to address it. Look, we don't know what we don't know, right? We don't know what Disney and Lucasfilm are doing behind the scenes. There's a story that just popped up this morning about Simon Kinberg, who's been involved in the X-Men franchise. He's been involved in Rebels, I believe, too, who might be penning a new Star Wars movie. We know that we've got the series of movies being done by the Game of Thrones guys. We've been told, it's speculated that we're going to get an Obi-Wan Kenobi movie, but the speculation that that's not going to happen now. The truth of the matter is we don't know what we don't know. And all that we can really judge is what's been given to us and what Disney and Lucasfilm are doing. And I hate to sound like an apologist, but I think they're doing a damn good job. I love the way that the novels, the comic books, the TV shows are all interconnected. To me, the barometer is what we take in. It's not the stories of directors getting fired. It's not the stories of reshoots. It's not the stories of screenplays being done. To me, the barometer of how well Disney and Lucasfilm are doing with my beloved and your beloved franchise is what we see on screen. And so far, everything's been pretty damn spectacular. There's a moment in last week's Rebels where it tied in an event that took place 2 years ago that it will be one of those Star Wars moments where I will always remember where I was when I saw that happen. And it happened during a cartoon. And that cartoon continues to make me cry like a young boy, right? Because it's okay that boys cry. But as a man, it's also okay that boys cry. Look, Disney can only do what Disney does best, right? And I know that's kind of well, yeah, of course. But I don't know. I know these shows have to get into this stuff. I get it, but man, sometimes I just feel like I wish they would. I wish they wouldn't. For so many times, and you can probably tell by the nature of this podcast in and of itself and how I kind of handle things. I get sick of hearing the business side of it, man. I want to get into the root of it. I get tired of hearing the podcasts that don't get into the root and the heart of it. This stuff's important to me. It means something to me. And that's why I'm excited to talk about the tidbits from the novel, because I love getting into these personal relationships and these dynamics and what these directors were trying to do and what Rian Johnson was trying to do and how he really opened up that relationship with Rey and with Kylo Ren. I mean, I dig all that. I listen to the news stories and I read the gossip stuff and I get into it, but sometimes I just kind of go, just let Disney and Lucasfilm do what it is they're going to do, and let's not second guess that, right? Let's just not. Yeah, let's not do that. Let's do this.
Let the past die. Kill it. If you have to. That's the only way to become what you were meant to be.
So good. All right, so this is an excerpt. Again, big spoiler alert. We're going to go through a bunch of stuff from the novel, so if you don't want to be spoiled, I would check out and come back to episode number 113 after you finish the novel. Be that as it may, here's a dramatic reading from Star Wars The Last Jedi novelization by Jason Fry. So this would be a page from the hut scene, okay? Right, the finger touching. All right. The moment Rey reached out, let me back up. The moment Rey reached her hut, she had felt him near her in the Force. The connection between them was so raw and powerful that it reminded her of touching a live wire in the wreckage of a starship. She had closed her eyes, opened them, and found Kylo Ren there, right next to her, where she sat on the stone bench. As if she could actually reach out and touch his hand, his face, his hair. At the sight of him, she'd felt relief surged through her. Kylo listened intently, his long face impassive as she told him about being drawn into the cave and into the stone, and how the journey had led to nothing, no revelation, except for how alone she was. "You're not alone," he insisted, and she believed him. "Neither are you. It isn't too late." Rey tentatively raised her hand towards his, expecting to see their hands go through each other and wondering if she would feel it in the Force somehow. But their fingers actually touched. She grasped his hand, jolted by the contact, and saw that the same shock had gone through him. Luke Skywalker walked into the hut to find Rey and Kylo with their hands clasped, staring into each other's eyes. "Stop!" he yelled, and he flung out his hand. The burst of power hurtled every stone of the hut outward from its center, scattering them around the bench where Kylo and Rey sat in astonishment. Rey's hand closed on nothing as she stared at Luke as the rain pelted them. She got to her feet and stared at the Jedi Master. What I find actually really interesting about this is that some great writing. I can't wait to read the novel, but I actually find the way that it was portrayed in the movie, maybe it's a given, but sometimes when you read novelizations, right, you get a deeper sense of what's going on. But I actually find the way that it was portrayed in the movie to be even more impactful. There are some moments in these excerpts, especially at the beginning, how she could feel him near her in the Force, right? The sight of him, she'd felt relief surge through her. Reaching out, touching his hand, his face, his hair. There's a lot more going on here, right? And maybe upon a second reading there, you're not getting quite all that. You can, if you watch that scene and that's where your mind is at, if you're looking through that lens, that there is a we'll say for lack of physical, we'll say emotional. There's an emotional bond there. You can interpret that however you want. But if you look at that scene through the lens of there is an emotional thing that's happening here, you can certainly imply all that's being written here in the book. But at the same time, I think Rian Johnson does a good job of leaving it a bit ambiguous. And as we work through some of the details here, there's a lot more here. Rian Johnson, and depending on the conversation that Jason Fry, who wrote the novel, had, it's clear they wanted to take that emotional Reylo connection as far as they could without having it oversee anything that J.J. Abrams wanted to do in the next movie. All right, so let's get into some of these tidbits from the novel. Again, taken from Reddit. The novel apparently starts off, and this caused quite a hubbub online when the first news of this came out. But apparently there is this dream sequence. It's an alternate timeline of Luke, where Luke is looking back at his time on the farm, his time with the droids, and he's thinking about having a wife. It really screwed everybody up. I thought this was actually happened, like Luke had a wife, and it turns out, no, it was just a dream sequence. But it does seem to cement the notion that Luke never, hooked up with anybody or ever had a wife. And I think most of us kind of accepted that, but we hadn't really seen it. Now it seems to be canon since he's dreaming about having a wife. And if that's the case, clearly he didn't have one. All right. So here we go. And this is not all just Reylo stuff. This is just stuff from the novel that I found interesting about all the characters and the whole story itself. Hux would rather get rid of any old Imperial stuff right straight away. they had to use their past, but the First Order has grown past the Empire, according to Hux. Starfighters are at the ready, but they held them back so Hux can show off the might of his big guns. So this is the beginning of the movie, and a bit of an explanation as to why they didn't, when the other First Order officer, and I can't remember his name, when he says, we should have launched our ships, 5 bloody minutes ago. He had them ready, but he wanted to show off the big gun. Han made Leia a figure out of wood the night before the Battle of Endor. It's burned or used during a brief memorial for Han during the evacuation. So this was the funeral scene that people were talking about that I was always kind of going, well, how does that fit into the movie? That makes sense. That during the evacuation, since they had just gotten word it's taking place right after The Force Awakens, that there's a brief moment where they have a very quiet memorial. Hux ponders the possibility of a dozen or 100 Starkiller bases after his victory. Interesting. A few of these tidbits go back to The Force Awakens. Kylo used the Force to protect himself from Chewie's bowcaster and its otherwise lethal bolt. So, again, this would explain why that bowcaster, one, really wounded him bad, which also flies in the face of those that want to call Rey a Mary Sue, why she was able to best Kylo Ren at the end of The Force Awakens. He was injured, and he actually held back from all the power of Chewie's bowcaster using the Force. Rey is not worried about Luke. She's good at two things: salvaging broken things and waiting, both two things that she needs to do. Toddler Kylo often played with the dice or showed it around in adoration of his father. Kylo would break stuff around the house with the Force while growing up. Leia and Han would worry behind closed doors, which Kylo didn't like. I like the inclusion of Kylo having played with the dice. It certainly adds a little bit more weight to that final scene in The Last Jedi where he, right before the dice disappears in his hands. Kylo doesn't fire on Leia because he feels that she's not angry with him when they make that connection in the movie. Leia finds her way back to the ship via the Force signature of dying microorganisms blown into space. A meta moment, and the author writes a lot of different meta moments here. Rey asks how old the temple is. Luke tells her to go away. While trailing after Luke, Rey asks whether this is the trope where the master ignores the pupil while actually trying to teach lessons. They had not yet had their special about you discussion, so Luke doesn't know she wants to be trained eventually, but then again, Luke is a Jedi Master. Luke asks if Rey is from Jedi lineage or royalty. Then they have the special discussion, and they conclude that she is an orphan. Luke hates the thought of numerous Chosen One orphans visiting him, and I thought that was a really interesting inclusion into the story, since it seems like within the Star Wars lore where we're heading is, there are multiple Chosen Ones out there. It was clear the goals of Luke were to burn the library and eventually die. Hux wanted to command the supremacy. He obviously does. Brings his captain from the Finalizer with him. The destruction of Hosnian Prime shows the supremacy is a good idea. That is, of course, until it gets all jacked up towards the end of the movie. Snoke needed Hux for a number of different reasons, but one was for the tech side of things. Kylo would have frozen the missile coming at Leia if he was not surprised in the moment that they had fired the missiles. Luke and R2 have had decades filled with missions. Interesting. The Force bond, right, the Force shipping, allows Rey to explore Kylo's set of Force skills. Luke wonders if he should be afraid of the pupil that wants to destroy him or the one that wants to be him. This next tidbit from the novel I find really interesting. Leia may have suffered from embolism, hypoxia, and solar radiation. I think that's a pretty big clue as to how they will end up explaining in Episode 9, what happened to Leia. I think she eventually will have succumbed to what happened when she flew back into the Raddus. Kylo did build his own saber, if anybody wanted to be sure. That's been talked about, though, in several of the different publications. Luke explores the cosmic force after having reconnected with the living force. Rey is a clear instrument of the will of the cosmic force. He also finds Leia again in the force. The will of the cosmic force was asleep after the end of the Sith and awoke during Luke's exile. Live force is the energy of life. Cosmic force is the will of the universe. As we talked about last week and at the start of the show, before Reylo and the hand-touching scene, right, Luke was coming to tell her, Rey, you were right, I'm coming with you. Luke goes and taps into Leia, finds out how she's hurt, wants to go and help. That's why he's looking for her in the movie. And when he shows up at the hut and sees them getting their fingers on, he decides, no way, man, my name's Paul. This is between y'all. Peace out. Kylo smiles at a cramped up Rey in the escape pod. Talked a bunch about that last week. In the book, they have an interesting exchange where they're kind of teasing each other when she arrives. Kylo says the saber is his. Rey says, if that's the case, then why did it call to her at the castle? She even teases about giving it to him. The stormtroopers around are looking nervous. A lot of people have been discussing that scene when she arrives on the supremacy and the teasing that is taking place. Rey says she saw the shape of Kylo's future when they touched hands before. It was solid and clear, like we hear in the film. That she will not bow before Snoke and will turn, also kind of in the film. Kylo said he saw her past instead, and just before the doors open, in the novelization, Rey realizes Kylo's churning emotions are not only about himself, but also about her. Rey is fixated with Snoke's eyes, like that hole in Octo. They look like the promise of secrets and power. There's a whole bunch of Snoke stuff I think's cool. Snoke muses about the visions of the future in general and their interpretation. Be careful or die. He learned this when he was young and the galaxy was different. And at an old age, he knows how much is left out in visions. Snoke has left legions of unaccounted dead adversaries that underestimated him. Snoke was an unexpected leader. The Imperials did not foresee that he would be the one. Rax didn't, Sloane didn't, the political fanatics didn't. As potential leaders, they were all co-opted, sidelined, or destroyed. Only Armitage Hux, our General Hux, was left, right? So that makes some more sense there, too. The rise of the First Order was mostly improvisation. It was not part of a grand plan. The Emperor's contingency plan was engineered to destroy and bring forth a rebirth longer than before. For decades, there were shipyards and laboratories and storehouses in the unknown regions. So this is providing a bit of backstory as to how the First Order has everything that they have. Snoke's knowledge saved the First Order from demise and potential threats. Snoke knew of Sidious. Let me back up. Sidious knew of Snoke and learned the truths about the Force in the unknown regions that lay there waiting to be rediscovered. Snoke appreciated that Luke went on a quest for truth before recreating a falling order such as the Jedi Order. Anakin and Luke were instruments of the cosmic force. Luke connected as people with Snoke to gain knowledge. Snoke does not need Rey in this time of victory anymore, but she would be a great apprentice tool in the past. Snoke does not believe in Kylo anymore either. He's a mix of light and dark, but unstable. He was rethinking his future after the victory that took place with I believe, he would rethink the future after victory, after they won total victory. Snoke noticed Kylo's surprise about the Force Bond reveal, but then senses calm and balance in Kylo. Kylo's biggest flaw has been restored. Snoke thinks Kylo can only be great if he uses his power to steer his own destiny. Rey feels a magnetic field or something around the Praetorian Guard armor, indicating the guards themselves feel pain due to it, and Rey's eyes are filled with joy after the carnage of the fight. Kylo, in response to Ben, said, "That's my old name." Kylo thinks that Rey leaving Kylo alive will also be her demise. Rey's error was that she thought Kylo's turn would be simple. He only rebelled against Snoke, but the future holds a range of possibilities. Kylo brought Hux to Crate so that Hux couldn't betray him. Leia knows Luke isn't there on Crate for real when they touch. Hux only knows the fake story about the Jedi and the coup from Return of the Sith. The First Order child soldiers are the legacy of the Jedi and clone training regimes. Luke also sees pain and fear in Kylo along with anger. Power feeds... Oh, this is pretty funny. Power feeds to the Falcon dish have been misaligned for 3 decades, and the Falcon has 3 computer brains with that all have different personalities. Wonder if that's something we'll end up seeing in the Solo movie. Leia tells Chewie about Luke, and they hug and talk quite a bit at the end of the novel. The Falcon scene is left half altered to shift focus to other characters, and there's not as much Rey and Poe interaction there. So those that were hoping for Rey Poe probably aren't going to get it. That's fine by me. Let's see. What else do we have here? Autumn changes to winter. The caretakers on Octo reminisce about earlier outsiders, kind and mad ones, and long times without visits, but people keep coming. Rey will be recalled as Luke's destructive and rude niece. That's an earlier joke, apparently, in the book where Luke refers to her as his niece, jokingly. The caretakers store Luke's weapon, his saber or staff, and the star compass. Some of the things that Luke brought actually came from Octo originally. The book also had Broom Boy at the end, just like the movie did. And then the person that wrote this added one more little edit, saying that Rey does use Snoke's shuttle, but has to wait in space while the First Order invades Crate. She gets a little annoyed when Chewie does not reach her as quick as she wanted to help her friends, and Chewie is annoyed by Rey's irritation. So that would provide some insight as to why they ended up on Crate kind of late into that battle. Next week, I'll spend a little bit more time when I have some time to look through some of the passages. Several passages from the Last Jedi novelization have made their way online, like the one I read earlier. And there's some really interesting continuing insight when you into Reylo, especially now that you have another author who's had the opportunity to talk with Rian Johnson and then expand upon the themes that they had. And that's kind of my takeaway, is that, Jason Fry gets with Rian Johnson, pokes around his brain ultimately on their thoughts on Kylo and Rey and the rest of the story. And then Jason Fry has the freedom to go and expand to the boundaries that have been laid out before him. So I think it's really neat that we get, Rian Johnson's idea, and then we get another individual who, lends their own insight into the personalities of these individuals who, again, are the core of this story. And that's what makes, The Last Jedi so great. So we'll do a little bit more of that next week. But for the remainder of the show this week, I got a ton of feedback, and let's just dive right into it.
We're the very last of the Resistance.
We need Luke Skywalker.
I'm not coming back.
Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi. You're my only hope.
That was a cheap move.
We need you to bring the Jedi back. Kylo Ren is strong with the Force.
What do you know about the Force?
It's a power that Jedi have that lets them control people and make things float.
Impressive. Every word in that sentence was wrong.
Ah, Skywalker, missed you have I.
Oh, they hate that ship! Come on!
The rebellion is reborn. The war is just beginning. And I will not be the last Jedi.
Of so many of my favorite lines from The Last Jedi, that moment, and we're going to get to your listener feedback, but I just saw an ad a moment ago that kind of reminded me that we are essentially 1 week away from the digital release, which means that I am 1 week away from being able to watch this in good quality on my screen, and it means I'm probably going to end up having to pay double because I'm not going to wait until the Blu-ray comes out because I'll get the streaming too. Be that as it may, at the end of The Last Jedi, when he pulls every thing you just said, every word in that sentence was wrong, the rebellion is reborn today, right? The war is just beginning. That moment is really, really rocketing to the top of my favorite moments in Star Wars ever. The way that's delivered, the cut between that and Rey and the rocks and meeting Finn, I can't tell you how much my love for this movie just grows and grows and grows. And this is such a difference from The Force Awakens for me. I love The Force Awakens. I do. I adore that movie. But it doesn't have the impact that The Last Jedi does for me, and it hasn't grown in the way that The Last Jedi has for me. And I know all the reasons why. It's all the reasons that I've been talking about in the podcast, in the show. It's the reasons why I do this show. Why Rian Johnson has quickly risen to the top of my list of people that I really pray that I have the opportunity to interview one day. For those that know, I do a Depeche Mode podcast. Depeche Mode is my favorite group ever, and because they're the best group ever. But a lot of the reason why I love that band is because of the lyrical content and the ambiguity and the emotion that is put into the song lyrics written by the band member Martin Gore and sung by Dave Gahan for the most part. They kind of switch off singing duties, and Dave has been writing songs over the course of the past decade or so with the band as well. But there's a depth and emotion to what Depeche Mode does, and one of their albums, Songs of Faith and Devotion, has a lot of parallels to The Last Jedi for me, and it's something I'm going to talk about in my next Depeche Mode podcast. So the good news is for you, Depeche Mode fans are going to hear about Star Wars, and for you, some Star Wars fans are going to hear about Depeche Mode. But just as a quick example, arguably one of Depeche Mode's biggest albums was Violator, and it had a lot of similarities to, in my opinion, to the way that The Force Awakens was received. The Last Jedi is to Songs of Faith and Devotion, which was the follow-up to Violator. Songs of Faith and Devotion was just like, right, The Force Awakens was to Violator. The first time I listened to Songs of Faith and Devotion by Depeche Mode, it was different and it was weird and I liked it, but I wasn't so sure about it. And over the course of years, now almost 2 decades, I guess, I've grown to absolutely love that album. It's probably my favorite album ever, because it did grow on me. And not all movies have a chance to do that, right? Some movies do, but not all. And again, The Last Jedi is something really, really special. And I was reading on the Reddit speculation Star Wars thread, and somebody had commented how the movie is going to be received down the line. I didn't click on it because, I didn't read it, because it doesn't really matter to me. Maybe eventually I will, but I saw it and I was like, I don't want to read that. I know what it means for me, and I know how special this movie is going to be for me for hopefully decades upon decades to come, for however long I continue to occupy this planet. All right, let's get to your listener feedback, and thanks to everybody who has left a comment on YouTube or emailed me, talkshownerd on talkshownerd@gmail.com. You can also find me on Twitter at Jon Justice. LB writes, in reference to, and I'm going sort of in reverse order of the most recent comments that I've gotten and then received, and then to some older ones that I haven't had a chance to get to. This is in reference to the podcast last week and the change in Rey and letting the hair down, right? In how, Rey's galactic date was what I titled last week's podcast. They absolutely prettied up Rey for that segment, says L. Look at how much mascara they applied. And her hair coming down and staying down is definitely supposed to indicate her coming into some sort of sexual awareness and power. For most of Western history, women started wearing their hair up once they were considered grown up and or married. The only man who saw her with their hair down after that, their husbands in bed. Hey now. And what I wonder about that, and I don't deny that at all, right? That is true, and I've heard that before. What I wonder is how much of it was a conscious choice and how much of it was subconscious by Rian Johnson and and the creative team, right? How much of that was again put into place because that, I don't want to say is the norm, but if you're going to have a transformation of a character coming into her own like Rey, did they sit down and have a conversation that was, say, as detailed as that, or was it more of just a subconscious thing? This one comes from Muskie777, and I could be pronouncing some of these wrong. Really enjoy your podcast. Thank you. Do you think J.J. Abrams has changed the direction, if he had any, on where he's going to take the film because of some of the fandom's negativity? First off, no. As I mentioned, J.J. Abrams has come out and addressed some of the controversies and the fandom backlash, doing that thing with my fingers, and said that he would not be making any changes. And that's good. He shouldn't. He shouldn't make any changes. I've mentioned this before, and I'll say it again. Be as genuine and as authentic as you can be, and you will reach the largest audience that you are capable of reaching. I had a consultant tell me that once. That is a dangerous play. Okay. I would argue that J.J. Abrams with The Force Awakens was lucky in that he did do something to appeal to fans. I don't think there's any denying that. And George Lucas recognized that. George Lucas liked to forge ahead, liked to try new and different things. J.J. Abrams was very clear. We got to go backwards to go forwards. It worked. I would argue that what Rian Johnson has done is that he was incredibly genuine and authentic to the movie that he wanted to make, the Star Wars that he wanted to see. He's reached the biggest audience that he is capable of reaching. Now, because of that, you are going to get some backlash. You are going to get some frustration because not everybody is going to see it your way. There are people out there that would have liked to have seen their own headcanon come to fruition on the screen. But the trade-off is, for those that do like it and do get it and do appreciate it, like me, like you, perhaps, it means that much more. And it's much more impactful. Okay, so thank you, Muskie777. Oh, and they went on to write, my bad. Sorry, there's more. Also, if Kylo/Ben is going to be the big bad in the next film, where do you think his relationship with Rey is going to go? I found myself rooting for them by the end of the film. Their scenes were just brilliant. I don't know. I don't know where it's going to end up. And quite honestly, I don't know if I know where I want it to end up. I know there is a part of me that would really like to see Kylo redeemed and Rey and Kylo to come together as one. Okay. I don't know, as a storyteller, not really necessarily being one, I'm not sure how you get there yet. I do think it's possible to get there, but a lot of things are going to happen along the way. The Last Jedi did a very, very good job, and Rian Johnson did a very, very good job of getting us to set aside for just a moment that Kylo killed his dad, right? There's a level of acceptance that we have in these films. Setting up Rey in the way that they have does afford the opportunity for the two of them to go off by themselves together. She doesn't have anyone, right? You're nothing but not to me. She could be the one to forgive him, and the two of them could then go off by themselves potentially, right? I mean, to have it any other way, it's going to be a rather awkward game night when Ben Solo shows up. I'm just saying. So I don't know where it goes. I think there's the possibility that Ben does get redeemed, but ends up dying in the end, right? In some sort of grand sacrifice. I kind of like the idea. I like the idea, and I have no way. This is just sort of my vision if I'm going to craft the movie. I like the idea of Rey putting together with having some kind of time jump. And again, I'm not sure exactly how you get there, but I like the idea of Rey putting together a new generation of Jedi, maybe having some Padawans old enough to go and fight, and perhaps the Knights of Ren coming back into play, where Kylo Ren's the big bad, but he has some loose cannon force wielders around him that end up becoming a larger threat that he ends up having to almost get into a similar situation like with the Praetorian Guards. And I'm just riffing. I don't know where they go. I do know that there is a part of me deep down, the hopeless romantic in me, that loves that moment in The Last Jedi where we go slow motion. She grabs that lightsaber and he ignites his, and they're doing it right. I love that. It's everything. It makes the dialogue and the exchange after them and the destruction of the legacy saber all that much more impactful. All right, let's move forward. Richard Cowell writes, concerning the reaction to the Phantom Menace, maybe you should try to watch The People versus George Lucas. The people in that film say some nasty things like George Lucas raped my childhood. Yeah, I'm a news talk show host full time, and I can only handle so much negativity. I'll be honest with you. I'd like to believe I'm not your typical news talk show host. And if you listen to my shows, these podcasts, enough to know that I'm sure that some of you might be surprised to hear that I am, but I am. That's what I do for a living. I've been doing radio for 21 years, and I've been a talk show host now for 10, 11 of those years now. I don't like getting into the politics part of it, of Star Wars in my fandom. I know that it exists, and the people that want to argue about social justice, and I've talked a little bit about this before. I don't want to go there. I really want to keep it positive. So, back to that comment. Yeah, I will probably never watch The People versus George Lucas. I just don't need to see that negativity. I get enough of that in the real world. I don't need it in my Star Wars fandom. Speaking of which, okay, there is one particular email. I'm going to go back on what I just said. There is one particular comment that I do want to address. Somebody made a comment in regards to a podcast that I did several weeks ago, talking a bit about the diversity and roles within Star Wars. I do want to address this. I did respond to it, but I do want to address it, and this is probably the most political that we'll get. But this Rabia Khan, and I hope I said her name correctly, Rabia Khan, wrote this, and I felt that it was appropriate for me to address it on the show. The whole meritocracy argument is kind of annoying, she writes. You can't say they're hiring the best people, and this was in regards to the backlash of hiring of the Game of Thrones writers, and people complaining that it was two white guys, okay, not enough people that were in charge of making these films. That being said, we just know that they're in charge of the process of these movies. We don't know that they're actually directing them at this point in time. So it is a little bit too soon to say whether or not these two individuals are going to be are they going to be showrunners like they were for Game of Thrones for a series of Star Wars movies, or are they actually going to be directing? And these things matter if we're discussing whether or not we have enough people of color or women directing films. Okay, so back to the comment. You can't say they're hiring the best people because we'll never know who else was considered for the project. And I never definitely be able to say the people they hired were the best for the part until the final product was revealed. There are people of different backgrounds, genders, and ethnicities who could make a great Star Wars movie. I agree. Let's see. Going on here. And of the creators chosen, will show in these movies, right, that they're presented. I'm sorry, I missed a point here, my bad. And the homogeny of the creators chosen will show in the movies we are presented. But don't say that we're being petty for wanting new voices in Star Wars. We're getting far more unique voices in cinema than we ever did, and Star Wars should branch out. I don't want sameness to my Star Wars, and people of different backgrounds will shake things up in a good way. I don't disagree, okay? I don't, but I am also somebody who does believe that we should be hiring the best people for a job. And I would think that the people being hired would want to be hired based on their skill level and not their gender or the color of their skin. I can't speak for those people. What I can say is we don't know what this process is. And as I've argued before, and as I argued the last time, which brought about this comment, when you look at the makeup of the story group, it is incredibly diverse. You have a person with a Latino background in Pablo Hidalgo. You have a man of Asian descent. You have two women of color that are on the story group. And I imagine that all of those people are the best suited to be in that story group. We will get a wide range of voices directing Star Wars movies for years upon years to come. But when you start to break down demographics, individuals who are directing, qualified individuals that are directing, what their backgrounds are, it's a lot harder to find the right people who fit into a certain mold to achieve diversity than I think a lot of people believe. For me, I'll continue to judge the product that I see on screen. And I've loved what I've seen on screen so far, and I've loved what I've seen in all the Star Wars content. I personally love the fact that we've had these female protagonists in these movies. I love that they went with Rey for Rogue One. I love Jyn in Rogue One. I love that they went with Rey in The Force Awakens. I am a person who grew up right on movies, grew up on Princess Leia, but I also grew up on movies like Alien and seeing Sigourney Weaver and Ripley in a strong female character, and then seeing her move on from that character in Alien to an ass-kicking warrior for all intents and purposes who had to rise to the occasion in Aliens. And I loved that. I loved seeing that. And I hope and I know we'll continue to see more of that. To me, the pettiness, and I'll move on. To me, the pettiness comes down to people who automatically cast judgment just because a new director is announced and they happen to be a white guy, without any other knowledge whatsoever of what went into that decision-making process. I don't personally feel that helps the fandom at all, but that's just me. All right, let's get to some more comments here. Eponine Reads, I'm probably saying that wrong, writes this: I wish that there were more sci-fi series than just Star Wars and Star Trek. If these guys want the story to go their way, why don't they start their own stories? Unless they are afraid, the only way they'll attract attention is the Star Wars brand. It is having the Star Wars brand on it. I can illustrate this by my favorite Friends episode. Monica is willed. I love this. By the way, I love this comment because I love Friends. I grew up on Friends. Monica is willed a fancy dollhouse. Phoebe isn't allowed to play with it in the way that Phoebe wants to play with it. The next day, Phoebe comes in with her own dollhouse, and everybody fawns over it. It's not impossible to attract attention with something completely different. I totally agree, and I'm going to let you listening on a little bit of the secret. I've actually been doing some writing. I don't want to give any details on this, but I have been doing some writing on my own, and it's a project that I've been working on for about 2 years now. Okay, I'm a horrible writer. Somebody's going to get paid a decent amount of money to edit my project once I'm done with it. I wanted to create something my own. I wanted to create my own sort of world. There is something, however, that George Lucas has done that screwed it up for everybody else. And I don't mean this in a bad way. And I think it's part of what makes Star Wars so special. You cannot create you're going to have a very, very difficult time creating an alternate universe based in space without having it compared to Star Wars, because George Lucas has already done it. Most of the time, and mine is Earth-based. And it's set way in the future, and again, I don't want to give more details than that. But even I ran into that problem, where trying to create a Star Wars-like story, you can't do it without being compared to Star Wars. Anything that you don't ground within the known universe is going to immediately be compared with Star Wars. And so I think that's why you have a lot of successful franchises. And Lord of the Rings doesn't count because that was written long beforehand. But that's why you have a lot of other successful franchises that are based sort of Earthbound, but they're in a different alternate universe, but still Earthbound. Especially if you look at something like Game of Thrones, Warcraft. Okay, these are all things that are sort of Earthbound, but otherwise. You look at somebody like with James Cameron, what he's done with Avatar, and I firmly believe that Avatar was done out of a desire to create a Star Wars type universe, but again, it had to be Earth grounded. So what do? You get it off the planet and you set it somewhere else in the future, which is sort of a similar tack that I've taken. I do enjoy the new Star Trek movies. I think all three of them are really, really fun, fantastic films. But again, they're based in what? They're based off of off of Earth. They're grounded in Earth. So George created something unique and incredibly special, but at the same time, he ruined it for everybody else. All right, getting to another comment. Mary Warren writes, "Thank you for recognizing what a treasure The Last Jedi is and noticing the care and attention Rian Johnson put into it. It breaks my heart to hear people trash it. If they don't like it, that's one thing. But I can't understand how they can say it's a they can say it's a well-done movie. I can't understand how they can say it isn't a well-done movie." Boy, I'm really tongue-tied today. My apologies. I've seen it 5 times now, and I love it more every time. Yeah, I don't have anything else to add to that. The longer I go away from seeing the film, the more I want to see it. I'm really desperate to watch it right now, and I was so glad to see that advertisement reminding me that as of Tuesday next week, I'll be able to watch it again on my screen here at home, despite the bootleg copy that I have, but we won't talk about that, and I'm going to wait to watch the good one when it comes. All right, Ryan writes this. "Miss you out here in Tucson. I was in Tucson for 9 years before I came here to Minneapolis. It's been a joy to follow my nerd world, especially since you are the one bright spot in my Star Wars fandom that kept me from giving up on The Last Jedi." Hey, that's cool. "After hearing your perspective on it and watching it 8 times now, I found my love for the movie, so thank you for that." Wow, that's super cool. You're welcome, Ryan. I'm glad that you decided to come around on that. My recent disappointment, we're getting into some politics here, but I'll address it. My recent disappointment with Star Wars has nothing to do with the movies. It's the incessant cry for social representation between characters and filmmakers. Watching the recent Jedi Collider Jedi Council, I'm just fed up about hearing about the racial/gender representation in Star Wars. Was there ever this much, and this is an inside joke for those that know me, Hukita over any other franchise? Hukita is just it's something I used on my old show to reference words you couldn't say on the air. Why are they doing this to my Star Wars? Knowing that I share your political views, I'm wondering how you deal with the SJW and political agendas wedging themselves into Star Wars. How do you ignore it and just keep your eye on what matters? Thanks, my brother Ryan. Because I just ignore it because it's not exclusive to either side, right? It's not. Left and right, it doesn't matter. There are people on both sides of the political spectrum that get dumb about Star Wars. And I know because I've talked to both sides of the political spectrum that get dumb on Star Wars. We're not in charge of this franchise. I trust Kathleen Kennedy and the Story Group and Disney and Lucasfilm. And these huge entities, these huge corporations, it does them no good to not have representation. And they should have representation. And I believe that they're doing a really, really good job at representation, right? The frustration that you hear from people, in my opinion, that feel like they're not doing a good enough job with representation, it comes back to the same people that have a hard time with Rian Johnson in not creating the movie that they wanted to make, right? I think that the intentions are good. And I do appreciate that. I think people's intentions are good, but I think sometimes we only hear the worst of the worst. Not all people, even the ones that don't think it's diverse enough, are as frustrated or irrational as most people are. So how do I deal with it? You just let it roll off you. Doesn't affect my enjoyment of the movies. Okay. Let's get to, this is Clara Safner. Hi. I have to say I really love your podcast. Thank you. I've been a fan of Star Wars since I was little, and I absolutely love the new movies. I had a thought while listening to you talk about where it could go in the next movie, so here it is. I feel like too many things need to happen in the next movie for the story to be even half finished. But a time jump of at least a few months could maybe solve that. How do you think it would work out if in that time the Force would continue to connect Ben and Rey in the same frequency as The Last Jedi? How could it influence the whole Reylo situation? Also, with a time jump, the Resistance would have time to get back on their feet. I just don't think how they would otherwise manage to cram everything that needs to happen into one movie, except if they make it happen off screen. Anyways, those are some of my thoughts on it. Thanks for the great podcast, and may the Force be with you. Melanie Power. Okay, that's her full name. All right, and then we have 2 more comments after that. Let me say this. I'm not opposed to a time jump. It's going to be a little wonky because I do think there's going to be one. It's going to be a little wonky considering there was no time jump in between The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi, and I do kind of think it would be cool if there wasn't another time jump. I almost thought it would be interesting if we went right into episode 9 and then actually experienced a time jump within the film after the intro. But I'm kind of with you. I do believe there's going to be a time jump. When it comes to the Force bond between Rey and Kylo, the book, if I remember correctly to some of the tidbits that I gave earlier in the show, the book mentions pretty specifically that Rey cut off that connection between her and Kylo. I think that if we get a time jump, we're going to be told pretty specifically that Rey has cut off and has not been in contact with Kylo Ren. I think that's going to be an important plot point because I think there will be a time when she does make that connection again, or the next time she sees him face to face is going to be all the more powerful. I also like the idea of a time jump where the crawl basically explains, after Luke's sacrifice, right, at the Battle of Crate, on Octo, the message has been received, and the Outer Rim territories have joined now with the Resistance to form a new rebellion. So where we start off with Episode 9, those individuals who did have allegiances to the Resistance now have found inspiration in Luke and have joined forces while the First Order has regained its foothold and continued its march across the galaxy under command of Supreme Leader Kylo Ren. See, look, I just went and wrote the crawl for you. Now you don't have to go watch the movie. All right. Cassiopeia from Poland writes this. Dear Jon Justice, just a quick note to say thank you for Star Wars My Nerd World podcast. I found them recently, and as a fierce Star Wars fan since childhood, I fondly listened to them during work. Thank you very much. It's so nice to hear a voice of pure fan love so close to my own. I like The Last Jedi very much. I can't wait for 9, and I intend to pass those 2 long years watching and listening to some good stuff. So please continue up your good work while drawing my Star Wars commentaries. Best wishes. May the Force be with you. Thank you, Cassiopeia. I really do appreciate that. And I do want to say up front that I hope I didn't get too political in my comments from earlier. I know I mentioned that I don't want to go there. If somebody is addressing me via these comments, I do feel that I need to respond to those. But generally speaking, even despite my own political leanings, I don't let it affect my fandom, and I certainly don't let it affect my opinion of people that listen. I don't care. I don't care what your politics are. We're all one together in this big Star Wars universe, and it doesn't really matter to me who you voted for or what you believe in apart from that. That's the great thing about Star Wars, man. It brings everybody in together, and that's one of the things I appreciate about it. All right, one last comment, and then we'll wrap up the show for this week. Jennifer Oliver writes this. Yeah, Rey definitely tried to look her best to go see Ben Solo. She definitely put herself out there. She put makeup on, fixed her hair, changed her clothes to a darker outfit, which has been explained on different news articles as a teal outfit only because she looked beautiful in it. But JJ can, of course, do whatever he wants to do with that. Not that I hope she turns to the dark side, but I do think it has a pull for her. I'm sure plenty of us kind of wanted her to take Ben's hand instead of the lightsaber, but nah. Then he doesn't need to redeem himself to be with her, and I feel he does need to be redeemed in this trilogy. I do like the idea, and thank you, Jennifer, so much for the comment. I really do appreciate it, and to everybody who's sent in their emails and comments. I really do appreciate it. Talkshownerd@gmail.com, at Jon Jon Justice. You can find me there on Facebook too, and then you can always leave a Twitter at Jon Justice. And you can always leave a comment up on YouTube. I like the idea that if we wrap up these 9 movies, I like the idea of having both Rey and Kylo there in some capacity where the true balance of the Force has come into play. If you're watching Rebels, you know the importance of, for those that know what I'm talking about, the Mortis arc, the light and dark, the balance. We've heard Snoke talk about it, Luke talking about the Jedi needing to end, and what their failures from before. The idea of Kylo getting redeemed, but there being a balance between these two characters internally of light and dark. And gosh darn it, was I listening to Rebel Force Radio where they were talking about this? Because it makes all the sense in the world that, and I've mentioned this before on the show. It makes all the sense in the world that you can't go one extreme or the other. That's just not how. I mean, that's not how we are as humans, right? Unless you sort of acknowledge the fact that we all have kind of a dark and light side to us. That's what makes us who we are. And a lot of times, when people sort of push fail to realize that they do have that other side to themselves, that's where people end up getting tripped up. You go one way or the other. I mean, so much of what George Lucas has created is knee deep in what we can all go and relate to, and this is part of it. And so I like the idea, if it ends up going this way, of Rey and Kylo still existing at the end of this trilogy, but having found a harmony, whether apart or together, that finally brings the galaxy into balance for this period of time. Because of the fact, especially since when you consider Luke, by and large, in having Vader redeemed but no longer existing and taking out Sidious, they won for a while, but the light side, right, the dark came to meet it. Just like Snoke had said, right? You know, the rise of the dark side and the light to meet it. So it seems to me that we're heading to a place where both are going to have to be there in some capacity in order for the galaxy to ever achieve any kind of harmony. All right, that wraps up episode 113. I believe it's 113. Doesn't matter. Thank you so much for checking it out. I've given the email enough. I've given my contact information enough. You've already heard it. But thanks. We'll be back again next week. Hopefully we get a new Han Solo trailer, the full trailer soon, right? Ooh, and next week, let's see, will we? No, we'll be close to the release of the digital version of The Last Jedi, so I'm sure we'll have more commentary then, and your comments, so please continue writing in and leaving those comments. I would really appreciate it, and I've appreciated you guys downloading it. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have recording it. May the Force be with you. Until next week, and always.
My nerd